These videos are not here to tell you how to listen to songs or how to interpret music in general. They're just my thoughts and opinions on music based on what I've learned over the years and my own experiences. I don't expect you to think of me as right or sole authority on these things. It's just another perspective that I hope you'll find interesting. So, first of all, apologies. This video is going up a little bit later than I had hoped, partly due to busyness this week and partly due to, as I sat down to make this video, I had trouble finding out a place where to begin. Which, yes, the song is called To Begin. But I guess one place to start is, it's about a year, I think, since I first wrote this song. I wrote it around this time last year when I was still at my last job and I was having a lot of trouble handling the workload that I was being given for various reasons. I don't want to get too deep into it, mostly just because I don't want to make it sound like I'm mad at my previous employers or anything like that. It was a great work environment. I was just having a lot of trouble with handling the workload I was being given, and a part of that had to do with the fact that as I've mentioned in previous videos, I have ADD, and for a while I was sort of vaguely aware that I had it. I went to therapy before college, and it was one of the things that we talked about, but I was just like, oh, well, okay, that's interesting, but I hadn't really done a whole ton of reading on it, and I hadn't really explored what that actually meant. And then the last year when I was having trouble at my job, I was having tons of anxiety, I was having bouts of depression, and I decided to go back to therapy to try and figure out what that was all about. And even before I had my first session last year, I actually watched a Hannah Hart video where she talks about mental illness and ADD and her own journey with her mental health, which I'll link to in the description of this video. And that reminded me that, oh, yeah, I have ADD, and as I came to learn through doing reading and going back to therapy, that can lead to serious anxiety and depression if untreated. And so that's sort of the mental state I was in when I was writing this song. One of my favorite quotes back in college, when I was also struggling with anxiety and depression and stuff, again, as I look back on it now, I realize due to having ADD and not having a really good way of dealing with it and not being treated for it in any way, one of the quotes that I learned in history class that I latched onto was from John Paul Jones, a naval officer in the American Revolution, as he's fighting a British ship and they're really having an intense battle. They ask him if he wants to surrender, and he says, "I have not yet begun to fight." And I liked that for a long time because it's just the audacity of it. Just sort of flying in the face of fate, just like, you think this is fighting? I haven't even started yet. So that's sort of a mixture of those two concepts or emotions or whatever is where this song started, I think. I guess one of the concepts that I find myself going back to a lot in my own writing is this idea of when you feel like you're at wit's end, when it feels like you're in a place of where it feels like everything's going to fall apart. That's the perfect place to begin something. This idea that endings aren't necessarily full stop the ending of things, just transitions to new things. Sort of like the opening line of the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, "To be reborn, first you have to die." And it's not a new concept by any means, but I mean, you could also quote Supersonic with "every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." So I by no means think that I'm breaking any sort of new ground, but I also think that there's a lot of different ways to say a thing, and whenever I find myself treading ground that I feel like other people have tread before, I think of times where I've read books or listened to music and heard a concept that I've probably heard a ton of times before, but for whatever reason, the way that this person put it is, it got to me somehow. So that sort of sense of defiant struggle against the odds, or whatever you want to call it, this idea that this feels like it's the end, but this is just the beginning. You think that I'm out of this, but this is where I shine. This is where I really start. I tried to reflect that in the music, obviously through the sort of driving rhythm that goes throughout the entire song, but also through the vocals. When I wrote this song, I knew that it was right at the top of my range when it comes to my vocals, and I knew that a lot of the time it was probably going to sound like I was struggling to hit those notes, but that's part of what I wanted the song to sound like. I still wanted it to sound good, and if my vocals sounded like really bad or really flat or just really haggard in a way that I wasn't happy with, then I probably would have backed away from it. But one of the stories I remember hearing about a famous composer, I can't remember the name of the composer off the top of my head, but I remember a story about him writing a concerto, and the soloist is trying to play this part that the composer has written, and he goes to the composer and says, I'm trying to play it, but it's so difficult, and I don't know if I can play it the way that it's written perfectly. And the composer says to him, I'm not looking for the sound of someone who can play it. I'm looking for the sound of someone trying to play it. And it's a story I love because it's another thing that crops up in my writing a lot, and another thing that you'll hear over the course of this album, and something that I think about when it comes to my own music or art in general, is this idea that perfection isn't necessarily what you want out of the art. You want something real, or you want something particular, and in this case the composer wanted that sound of struggle. And I'm always trying to push myself with my own songwriting, whether it's by trying out different chord progressions or trying out different stuff on instruments that I haven't tried before, or in the case of my vocals, trying to push my range just a little bit further to see how far I can go. And so it seemed only fitting for the song that I write a vocal line that I had so much trouble recording in the studio. There's some video from recording it in the studio that I am planning on putting into I think I have video of it. But yeah. That I'm planning on putting into a sort of day at the studio video I'll be releasing later on in this video series. Also, that sort of came from listening to singers like Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, who there's a lot of Foo Fighters influence in this song. I will totally come clean on that. Particularly the whole drop to like a single instrument for the bridge and then just build throughout the bridge. But I'll listen to people like him sometimes and they sound great, but I'm like, why would you do that to yourself on the vocals? That's gotta tear up your vocal cords, and he does it for like full 2-3 hour concerts or something, and I'm just like, how? And a lot of the times I think the answer is just, well, that's how it sounded in my head, so I just pushed myself to do it until I could do it well. So I tried that out with this song. There's still parts of the studio recording where I'm like, I don't know, my voice. But again, if I was looking for, if it was perfect, I wouldn't be happy with it. If it sounded perfect and clean and exactly the way that the notes, like, first of all, I don't believe in perfection. I don't think it's a thing that exists. And there's such a great risk and a chance of failure when you're working in those places on the edge between what sounds good and what sounds bad, or on the edge between success and failure, if you want to think about it like that. But that edge is where I think some of the most beautiful art comes from. At least it's where the art that I am most engaged by comes from. And so if I even get an inkling of that on this album, then I feel like this album has been a success. There are so many things that I could nitpick about it, and there are so many things I could say like, oh, I could have done that better, or I could have, if I had spent a little more time on this, it could have worked. But at some point, you gotta let go. And that was a big thing with this song, especially with it being the opening track. I was like, oh, I don't know about this. Is it, I mean, I wrote it as an opener, but is it too on the edge of what sounds good to lead with something like that? Maybe I should lead with one of those songs I feel like is a little safer, or just sounds good without pushing my vocals that hard. But I mean, where's the fun in that? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on the song, and the next song video, the next performance video, will be up Tuesday, October 25th. If you have any questions or comments on that song, please leave comments, ask questions, and I'll try to talk about them in the Songwriter video for that song. That will be up next Friday, and this gives you an idea of what I'll be talking about in these videos. So if you have any thoughts whatsoever and you want to hear me talk about a particular thing, whether it's where a certain lyric came from or why I chose a certain chord progression, I don't know what you guys would be most interested in hearing. I don't know how many people here are really into the musical theory side of things. I didn't talk a whole lot about that in this video, although there are definitely things I could talk about with it. But any sort of comments that you have are greatly appreciated. And I want to try and generate some sort of dialogue so that you guys can get as much out of this as I do. Again, thanks for watching. See you on Tuesday.